This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Chapter 2 dealt predominantly with internal matters, the internal appraisal that we have here. We looked at resources, competences, we looked at a great big list of the M words with all the resources, and we looked at the value chain. This chapter begins to look now at the external appraisal, the macro environment and the micro environment. These are the environments in which the organization is operating. And the first model, we have a very kind of famous model, or generally well-known model, looks at the macro environment, the big things in the world, events which tend to affect every organization, maybe to different extents. And it goes by the name of PESTEL, and it's looking at influences as follows. So the P we have here is political. So political changes. So a company seeing that in maybe a year's time we're going to have perhaps a change of government, or at the time of recording in the UK we will be facing a referendum as to whether or not we want to stay in the European Union or not. And these are some of the political matters which are going to affect maybe the future, the strategic future, the long-term future of organizations. Also under the heading of political, there can be political unrest, there can be wars breaking out. You can just easily see, say, if you were an airline, how political unrest in various areas of the world is going to sharply reduce the number of passengers, and maybe even decide that it's simply too unsafe to fly to certain destinations. E is economics. And we've had, quite a roller coaster ride in recent years in terms of economics. Around 2008, the whole world kind of slumped after the banking crisis, was gradually pulling up again and so on. But we've got stuff in there like, the price of oil has vastly altered the landscape. Think if you were a fracking company and the price of oil has gone down, or you were drilling in the North Sea and the price of oil has gone down and shows no maybe quick prospect of going up again, think how you would want to alter your investment plans. Interest rates are also in there, and just the exchange rates and inflation rates, and of course just the general economic confidence. In a time of confidence and boom, more people are willing to spend more money on perhaps luxuries. In a time where maybe people are frightened of their jobs, then you cut back on expenditure. Maybe there isn't as much money to go around, and maybe production has to be reduced in certain types of organization. S is social. Social events, social happenings. One of the biggest ones is the way populations are changing in many parts of the world, certainly in the West. We tend to have a lower birth rate, but people are living longer because of medical advances and so on. And this is causing, certainly difficulties for governments in wondering how to fund health services and how many hospitals they're going to need and so on. But of course it gives opportunities. If you're a pharmaceutical company and you saw the world was gradually kind of getting older, people are gradually getting older, then older people are the biggest consumers of pharmaceuticals. If, however, you are running schools and the birth rate was going down, and you're kind of feeding that through into maybe number of people applying to universities then you would be seeing longer term, maybe they're going to be less need for having as many universities or as many lecturers or whatever you're trying to plan for. Also within that social, there comes habit, there comes fashion to some extent as well. We've maybe all got into the habit because of cheap airfares, more of a social norm to have long weekends away and flying there. That, of course, once these habits are established, then they can sometimes last for quite a while, and organizations have to be sensitive to these. T is technology, and probably the biggest single technological earthquake, really, that's affected many companies is that of the internet. It has directly affected music companies, film companies, television companies, perhaps book companies, but of course then it indirectly affects things like airlines, banks, where they encourage people, and indeed people want them, to have websites, so instead of going to a travel agency and so on, you can book directly. And of course what might be good for some parts of the industry or some industries with the internet, it's maybe bad for other parts. I mean, the job of travel agents, far fewer travel agents are needed now because people go directly to the airline or the hotels or the coach companies or whatever. The second E is either environmental or ecological. I like to call it ecological. Because these are all kind of environmental factors. Ecological stuff is to do with waste, to do with greenhouse gases, to do with carbon emissions, to do with recycling, and the like. And this has, like it or not, this has impinged, or people's preferences for perhaps certain sorts of preservation has impinged on many companies. Not only has perhaps there been more taxes which have come in, which penalise companies with that are producing a lot of pollution or a lot of waste and so on, but simply from a public relations point of view, many companies find it worthwhile to advertise the fact, really, that they are trying to be good citizens of the earth, so to speak, and are not wasting resources and polluting and so on. And probably this is going to keep increasing. There are going to be probably more stringent laws about emissions. Maybe the expense of gas and electricity and heating and so on is going up. And we need to plan for that. So, for example, some of the large companies like Google and Facebook, which have got huge computer installation, they call them server farms, where there's just kind of thousands of hard disk drives whirring away, holding all your personal information. Many of those companies are putting their new installations not kind of in the desert in California where maybe they started, but they're putting them up north. They're putting into more Arctic regions, areas maybe like Alaska, Oregon, Norway, and so on, because there these server farms produce a lot of heat. They have to be cooled, but if you put them somewhere which is naturally rather cold, then it means you don't have to spend electricity on air conditioning them. And they're doing that partly for PR reasons, but partly because they perceive that in the longer term, it's probably going to be the profitable place to put them. And then finally we have legal. To all intents and purposes, legal and political kind of overlap quite a bit. But there are new laws and regulations. We have, for example, in the UK, a lot of laws to do with maximum working weeks, number of hours you can work, minimum wages. There's more health and safety legislation, more consumer laws, more regulations about maybe what sort of products are allowed, maybe more regulations about planning and where you could actually put a factory up. So long term, we have to see, where, as best we can, try to predict kind of where the world is going, and to take that into account when we're planning. There is no point if interest rates are going to be high for a very long time and lots of people are going to be unemployed. There is not much point probably in launching new luxury goods. At that sort of time, you want to launch cheaper value goods and so on. If you think the technology is getting better, let's say mobile phone technology, there is no point you as a communications company deciding to put wires into everybody's apartments and houses to try to put in a conventional phone system. And by and large, you can't fight these very much. You might try and get laws changed or deflected slightly, but most of what's happening there is outside any single company or organization's power to alter, and you have to adapt and live with it. Part of what's going on in PESTEL could then be specialized a little bit, just two mentions, something called industry convergence, and then we have the international dimension. Now what's happening in industry divergence, in industry convergence, beg your pardon, is that you find that there are fewer and fewer companies, perhaps fewer and fewer devices, but these companies and devices do more. So you only have to think about your mobile phone. So the mobile phones now, obviously they are phones, but they take very good photographs, many of them. They can be radios, they can be browsers on the internet, your MP3 player, they can be GPS units and so on. And you have to think, if the industry is converging like that, that's one particular type of convergence. Where is the place now for relatively cheap cameras? So there's still a place for very sophisticated, high quality cameras, single lens reflexes and so on. But what about the the kind of cheap-ish camera, maybe about $50, giving really quite good results, but you kind of take it on your holidays and so on, very portable. And why would anyone buy a kind of standalone camera if your mobile phone does just as good a job? And TomTom makes GPS, global positioning satellite devices for cars. It helps you find your way around cities. But really, they have been suffering a fall off in the sale of their hardware because many mobile phones are equipped with GPS, and TomTom is in a way having to make more of its money from its mapping. It's very good at mapping streets, knowing where there's no entry and so on, where the layout of a roundabout has changed and so on. And they sell this essentially to people like, or apps anyway, that will go on iPhones, so that you get even your GPS in the phone. So what it tends to mean, and of course Amazon sells everything. And what it tends to mean is you have fewer organizations, bigger organizations, and less room for small organizations. Similarly, international dimension, more and more companies are becoming global, and a lot of what's pushing it is a cost advantage. So if you're producing only 10,000 units for your home market, then the 10,000 units has to bear all the costs of research and development and marketing. But if you go international and you're making millions of units, then you are spreading those fixed costs very thinly, and you have great buying power from the suppliers of the components. So now we end up with relatively few large car companies, relatively few mobile phone companies, relatively few computer companies and so on, because both for industry convergence and the international dimension, we tend to find that the bigger companies are winning out over the smaller ones. Of course, some activists think that this is a bad thing. They're very much against globalization. They say that some of these large companies are more powerful than sovereign governments, and they, whenever there's a meeting of the G20 or whatever it is, they go and protest, saying that it's unfair to smaller producers in local markets to swamp their markets with these cheap goods and to do them out of a proper living. But again, we need to think, if we were a small operator, how are we going to compete against the big boys? It's almost getting back to cost leadership and differentiation. It's very difficult for small companies to compete head-on with large companies with fantastic volumes of operations, because they can just get the cost down so easily. Whilst we're dealing with international matters, we can just look at something called Porter's Diamond. I have to get this straight in my mind what it's about. Porter's Diamond is about nations. And it is about why certain countries, certain nations get a strong reputation for producing certain goods or delivering certain services. So, always when I say, what is Germany famous for? If I was selling this to a classroom, everybody says cars. And we know that Germany has got several fantastic car companies. There's BMW, there's Mercedes, there's Porsche, there's Volkswagen. I know at the time of recording, Volkswagen's crown has slipped slightly because of the emissions scandal, but certainly in terms of engineering and reliability and so on, and design, they're fine. And you mentioned another country, what about Japan? Most people say it's very good at kind of consumer electronics. You've got Sony, Hitachi, Toshiba, and so on there, and very good at cameras. If I ask people what is England good at, then there's often a bit of a silence there. But we're not particularly good at mass manufacturing anymore, but we've got certain strength in engineering, design, media, and so on. So Porter says, how did this come about? How is it that Germany is well known for cars, France is well known for wine, Scotland well known for whiskey, West Coast of America well known maybe for electronics and IT. And he said the first thing is factor conditions. And factor conditions is almost like your almost raw materials here. And there are two sorts of factor conditions. The first one he called a basic factor condition. And this is things like raw materials that you can find in your country, maybe coal or iron. It can be the climate, it can be the rainfall. So one of the reasons why France is particularly good at wine is it has the right soil and it has the right climate, which encourages the grapes to grow well. One of the reasons maybe why Germany is particularly good at cars and other engineering is it has big reserves of iron ore and it has coal. It was able to develop a steel industry very well. And then on top of that, on top of the basic factor conditions, you have got advanced factor conditions. Advanced factor conditions are things like the infrastructure that has been put in, the roads, the telecommunications, or maybe the educational system that your population benefits from. And Ireland is an interesting one there. Ireland is really the country of choice for American IT companies to set up their European operations in. And Ireland is popular for largely advanced factor conditions. First of all, it has a low corporation tax regime, which makes it attractive. Secondly, they speak English as a first language, really, which is handy for the Americans. Third, it is in the European Union, which is what they want. They want a foothold in the European Union. Fourth, it has a relatively high birth rate still, and quite a good educational system. So you have got really quite a large number of well-qualified young people coming onto the job market, and just the sort of place they can end up, of course, is in Google or Apple or one of the other firms. So it has, because of all these factor conditions, it makes it a kind of natural choice, I suppose, if you're going to be an American company setting up an IT foothold in Europe. Then Porter went and said, next thing we need is demand conditions. This really means home demand conditions. So one of the things that Scotland is good at is making tweed, which is quite a heavy woolen cloth. Its basic factor conditions were really that it has a lot of sheep producing a lot of wool. It had a lot of very isolated people. It's quite a difficult country, a lot of it. People who would work in small communities, and they would be weaving. There's nothing else to do really, no other industry really, and they'd be weaving this very traditional, thick, warm fabric. And why did they do it? Well, because Scotland is really quite a wet country. It's quite far north. It's quite windy. It can be beautiful weather, but a lot of the time it is quite wet, windy and cold. And there was a demand for heavy woolen warm fabric. It's very unlikely that, the tweed industry would ever really have started in Italy. Italy would be more interested in lighter fabrics to suit their climate. But there was a home demand for woolen fabric in Scotland. And what Porter was saying was really when you begin operating, when you begin producing, you first begin producing for your home market, and there has to be a demand there, otherwise you'd never get off the ground. And then he said, if you were the monopoly producer in your home market, you are likely not to be a very good producer, because one of the characteristics of monopolists is that they do get sloppy. There's no incentive really to keep improving. And if you're going to take on the world, if you're going to become the best in the world, then what you need is a bit of rivalry, a bit of competition. And also what you need is the ability, or the country needs the ability, to let other industries start up. So really the structure of industry, how easy or difficult it is to start up new companies and so on, is going to make a difference in how good this initial supply becomes. Because only when you're world class, and that comes through, the tough competition that's there with many rivals, only when you're world class are you going to get this international reputation. And the final thing he said that would add towards the success of a country in a particular industry is you will get related and supporting industries. You get a cluster of related industries. So in the west coast of America, in California, you have loads and loads of businesses, all to do with IT. So you have Intel there, and Intel makes, it may not be California, but it's west of America. You have Intel, which makes the computer chips, designs and makes the computer chips that are used in the vast majority of computers. Basically, you have Microsoft, which is up in the west in Seattle. You have Apple, which is based around California, and so on. If you go around and look at where the head offices are for many of these IT businesses, they're all kind of in the west of America. And the great thing about that is it makes it convenient. It makes it convenient to see your suppliers. You also get employees who maybe start off working for Intel and they move to Apple and they maybe move somewhere else and so on there. So you get this great kind of depth of knowledge and depth of expertise supporting the whole industry. So Porter's Diamond tries to explain why certain nations have a reputation for doing certain things. I always think it's more of historical interest. I don't think if I was setting up, say, a car company, I would necessarily think, well, I'll set it up in Germany. Do I think being able to stamp it made in Germany is going to be making a big difference? Especially maybe if German costs are relatively high. Maybe if I was starting up a car company, I would try and put it somewhere in a country a little bit cheaper and try to grow my reputation for quality and expertise and so on in that. So I'm not sure how much people use this to plan the future, but it's an interesting theory about why certain countries are very good at certain things. So PESTEL looked at big things: the politics, the economics, the social, the technological, the ecological and the legal. The next model we have is really a more micro environment, sometimes called a competitive environment, Porter's 5 forces. And this looks very much at industry attractiveness. And it applies to industry sectors, so this could look maybe at the car industry, the aeroplane industry, the film industry, the book printing industry, and so on. So it looks not at companies, not at countries, but at industry sectors. And it says, how attractive is it to be in that industry? In other words, how easy can it be to make good profits? It's almost as though you won £1 million on the lottery and you're going to invest it in an industry. Which industry would you prefer to invest it in? Where do you think you're going to make money relatively easy? And he said there are 5 influences here, 5 forces. And sometimes we can do things about them. Okay, PESTEL we can't do very much about. Sometimes a company can do something about these. So we'll start with competition or rivalry. And it goes really, the whole scale that we have in here goes from monopoly out to perfect competition. So monopoly is where there's only one supplier of particular goods. Perfect competition is where there are many small suppliers of very similar goods. Now I think you can probably tell that you're going to have a much easier time if the industry you're in, you are a monopolist, because you're the only person who's setting prices, you're the only person who's deciding when to bring out a new model or an innovation and so on. You have kind of got complete power there. When you move over to perfect competition, then essentially what's happening is you've got 100 competitors. They're all kind of fighting under price a little bit. They're all trying to bring out a new product that you have to kind of keep up with. You can't charge very much above what's called the market price, the going rate, because no one will come to you and so on. And you're going to have a harder time there. Anything you can do to shift the market towards monopoly is going to give you a stronger position, a more attractive position there. Simply you're knocking out competition is what we're saying. And the way companies do that, one of the commonest ways, is takeover. You take over a large rival and maybe cuts the number of people operating there from 5 down to 4 or something like that, and then maybe they consolidate again. And we know, of course, that many governments get a bit concerned about this. They are worried that if it ends up being too much of a monopoly, then there is an abuse of that monopoly and consumers don't get a fair deal. Another way you can try it is you can try driving out the competition. So what you do is you've got lots of money in the bank, you reduce your selling price by 30% for some time, knowing that if your competitors try to match it, they'll run out of cash before you do. You drive them out like that. In some industries, the way you try to get towards a monopoly is by murdering your rivals. In the drugs industry, if you're selling heroin or cocaine on the streets and so on, then of course there are drug wars where people get rid of the competition by shooting them. It's not ethical, of course, but it makes perfect economic sense. Next, we'll look at potential entrants. People sitting on the edge of the industry, looking at you, seeing you making a bit of a profit, and they may come into it. And these people are complete nuisances, because when you get a new entrant coming into the market, they like to make a bit of a splash. They'll come in with special introductory offers, lots of advertising and lots of razzmatazz. And you, as an existing person in the market, kind of have to respond to that to hang on to your customers. Anything there is to keep these people out is good, and what we're really talking about in general terms is what's called a barrier to entry. There are very few barriers to entry which are absolute. There are more impediments to entry, making it hard for people to get in. So one of the barriers to entry is know-how. If your industry is very complex with lots of skills, then it's certainly hard and high risk for somebody to get into that industry with reasonable assurance they're going to make it work for themselves. Another potential impediment to entry anyway is high capital expenditure needed. So to get into the industry, you have to raise a lot of money, spend a lot of money on plant and machinery. It just makes people think, you know. Whereas if you were, in the window cleaning industry, then you can get into the window cleaning industry, new entrants will come in. It doesn't take a lot of know-how, it only takes a bucket and a ladder really, and you're in the industry and there's a new competitor there. Licensing, if you have to go through sophisticated licensing procedures, again, it's a bit of an impediment to getting into the industry. As I say, generally it won't stop people getting in, it just kind of slows them down. The only thing that maybe stops people getting in, if you're lucky enough to have some sort of legal monopoly. Suppliers and buyers are very much two sides of the same coin almost here. Let's say selling here, and that 80% of your output goes to one very large buyer. Now that's quite an uncomfortable position, because if that buyer says, I want you to reduce selling prices by 20%, you have to really capitulate on that, you have to do it, because you couldn't risk or afford for that person to go somewhere else. Therefore, what we want to do is to try to diffuse that in some way. One way is you try and find other customers, so that you don't have as many eggs in one basket. Maybe what you do is you think of entering into a long-term contract, so that instead of kind of living from order to order, you have an exclusive 5-year contract for supply, and you can kind of rest easy at night that this person won't abandon you, or insist on price reductions. Another thing that people talk about is switching costs. Switching costs, you make it kind of difficult or inconvenient for people to change from you to another supplier. And I've no doubt come across this on a kind of personal basis. Relatively few people in the UK switch banks. And the reason they don't switch bank is frankly they can't be bothered. It's too much bureaucracy almost to switch banks. You have to make sure that your salary comes into your new bank account. You have to look at all your standing orders and direct debits to make sure they all are adjusted and go out to the proper people, otherwise you're going to be evicted from your apartment and so on there. It's just bothersome. And so if the bank looks after you reasonably, you're not even going to maybe look somewhere else. That's switching costs, where you try to tie people in really, maybe by giving actually very good service. Suppliers, if you get a unique component and an important component from one supplier, and that's the only supplier there is, again this supplier has you at their mercy. If they double the price of this component and you can't get it anywhere else and it's essential to your construction, then you have to pay the price. What can we do about it? Well, again, maybe a long-term contract of supply, so at least we're guaranteed we're going to be supplied okay for 3 years and so on. Another thing you might think of doing obviously is finding other suppliers. Do a Google search and so on. And maybe what you try and end up with is 4 suppliers, and you give your orders, kind of a cycle to each of them, so that if one disappears or puts their price up, you've got a fallback. Another thing sometimes people do is they take over their supplier. Now that's a form of diversification, and I kind of warned against diversification, but it's a sort of related diversification. If you take over this important supplier, it means that nobody else can. And if a rival took over an important supplier, they could stop supplies going to you. It also means maybe you can give them financial support and so on, if you're worried about them going out of business and leaving you in the lurch. And finally, we have substitutes. Substitute products tend to come really out of the blue, rather kind of surprisingly, usually through the operation of technology. And one of the, I suppose, relatively recent substitutes that we have had is MP3 downloads instead of CDs. Both are mechanisms to get music to you, But then, as broadband or ADSL became common and we were able to compress audio reasonably well into MP3 files and so on, instead of buying CDs, or instead of even buying and downloading MP3s, people now begin to stream a lot through organizations like, say, Spotify and so on. And this, of course, put the traditional suppliers of music into a bit of a dilemma at one stage until they kind of got it sorted out a little bit. By and large, you can't do anything about a substitute. You have to live with it. You can't put the technology back in the bottle and so on. And most of the time, you have to join it. So you could have been a conventional company dealing with dairy products. So you're making butter. A substitute to butter is vegetable spreads, low-fat vegetable spreads. You know that some people will prefer low-fat vegetable spreads to butter. And if you're going to keep your market share, then you have to kind of join them. You have to begin making low-fat vegetable spreads, perhaps as well as making butter. But you can't ignore the substitutes. Unfortunately, as I said, they often surprise you. Often a new technological breakthrough will, within a few years, seriously undermine an existing market and an existing company. Finally, in this chapter, we almost sum up a lot about this and the previous chapter. We're looking at internal resources and capabilities. We're looking at external, the macro and the micro environments. And we do this in a SWOT analysis. So SWOT analysis looks at strengths and weaknesses. These are strengths and weaknesses of ourselves, of our organization, and these are internal. So our strengths might be we've got lots of money in the bank. Our weakness might be that we have got very poor quality control, that some of our methods and methodology and so on aren't so good. Our strength might be a very strong brand name, but our weakness might be that our senior management have all left or something, and we're a little bit thin on the top. Opportunities and threats, these are external. So an opportunity might be that we see one of our rivals in financial difficulty, we can go and buy them. A threat might be a new entrant, a powerful new entrant coming from abroad, opening up in our market for the first time, potentially able to undercut our prices and so on. That's an external threat. So we can bring together what we've learned on things like value chains, the resources, the competences, the PESTEL, the 5 forces, and so on, and kind of categorize them as strength, weakness, opportunity, or threat. It is, however, quite useful to set them out like this on this kind of a matrix we have here, because what's important in kind of strategic planning is not just the analysis, not just the obtaining the data. It's then saying, so what? I've discovered this threat, or I've discovered this opportunity. What am I going to do about it? Because if this collecting of information doesn't spark some sort of action, it's all been a bit of a waste of time, really. A completely academic exercise. So what this is really saying is, if you have a strength and an opportunity and they match, then that's really a marriage made in heaven. So your strength might be lots of money in the bank. The opportunity might be one of our competitors is in a poor financial state. Therefore, we can use our strength, the money, to buy the competitor and to put ourselves in a more favourable position. And that just works fantastically. Or an opportunity might be we're looking around and we see a particular country where the population seems to be getting wealthier, but where they're not selling our particular product. Our strengths are maybe we've got a relatively strong brand name, even though it isn't known there very well, but we have got a lot of international experience in our management of opening in other countries. So if we decide, right, we're going to try opening in this country, in this new country, we've got the management expertise to do it, then again that's something that's probably going to work okay. If you have an opportunity and a weakness, then you mustn't progress with that opportunity until the weakness is repaired. So if the opportunity was a competitor in financial difficulty, your weakness was you don't have very much money to spend, then either you can't buy the competitor, or what you have to do is go out and raise the finance. Or if you had the opportunity of opening in a country where you think there's great markets available to you there, but you have got no international marketing expertise at all, it would be stupid to try launching in that country without the management resources you need to make it successful. So maybe what you do is you have to go out and recruit some managers, marketing people with international experience. Threats and strengths. So we have a threat, maybe a powerful competitor thinking of entering the market, maybe from abroad. Maybe your strength is that you are loved by your customers. You've got a very strong brand name, you have a very good reputation. And of course you can use that strength. You can say, well, you know, we're employing local people, we're a local company and so on. Why are you buying from this foreign company coming in? You can kind of almost appeal to a nationalist, or at least anyway, you appeal to people's loyalty and your brand strength to try and defend yourself against the threats. However, if this is what you find, you're probably in trouble. There's a threat, and it's kind of accurately pinpointing somewhere where you are weak. And it's very hard to defend against that. This happened really with the UK car industry in the 1970s. We had our own car industry with names like Morris, Austin, Humber and Riley and so on. Old kind of nostalgic names that I suppose really began growing in the 1930s. But by the time the 1970s came around, these companies like Rover were making dreadful cars. They hadn't put money into design, and in particular they hadn't spent much time or effort on quality control. And in particular, Japanese cars were beginning to come in, modern designs and fantastic quality. And here we had the Japanese threat, if you like, which was claiming this fantastic quality. We had our own car industry, which was weak exactly in quality and design and so on. And effectively the Japanese kind of destroyed our car industry. And in a way quite right that they should, because our car industry didn't really deserve to survive given the dreadful products it was making. Now what has happened is that the Japanese car companies like Toyota and Nissan, they have all set up very large factories in the UK which are producing absolutely fine cars, but we had to learn a trick or two in terms of design and particular quality control from the Japanese before we could successfully, if you like, manufacture cars again.
This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.